Welcome to the United Nations World Data Forum session, giving a voice to hidden populations, measuring and combating modern slavery with data-driven solutions. In this session, you will learn about state-of-the-art methodologies used to measure and combat modern slavery. Specifically, this session will discuss the use of survey-based estimation techniques and respondent-driven sampling approaches in measuring and tracking this phenomenon. And technology-driven computational law, AI, and big data methods that can be developed and deployed to help governments, businesses, and civil society combat modern slavery. This session aims to report on recent developments and innovations in the estimation of the scale of modern slavery and human trafficking, and highlight technological advances and tools that can be used to develop effective solutions in tackling modern slavery. As a result, participants will gain a better understanding of the issue, how new technologies and big data can be leveraged to tackle and end modern slavery, and how to protect vulnerable groups that are both difficult to reach and often left behind. This session will underscore the need for collaboration between governments, civil society groups, academia, international organizations, and the private sector in collectively achieving progress towards SDG Target 8.7. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today. From the MIT Task Force, we have myself, Shauna Hoffman from IBM, Brian Ulicini from Thomson Reuters, Daza Greenwood and Brian Wilson from the MIT Computational Law Report, Thomas Lairs from United Abolitionists, Adriana Bora from the Future Society, and David Crowley from TRUPR. From the Walk Free Foundation, we have Jackie Larson, Sheldon Zand from the University of Massachusetts Lowell, Yuki Lowe from the Freedom Fund, and also Pablo Diego Rosell from the Gallup. Thank you so much to Kiki Papacristalfran from Gallup and also Elise Gordon from the Walk Free Foundation for their support of this session. We couldn't have done it without you. Next, we will hear firsthand examples of modern slavery and human trafficking, along with its challenges.
Take a minute to think about this. There are approximately 40.3 million men, women and children living in the world who are victims of modern slavery. It is incomprehensible that any slavery exists today. So how can the number be so high? Now, in its fourth edition, the 2018 Global Slavery Index is the world's most vigorous study of this crisis. It measures the prevalence of modern slavery, country by country, the risk factors that make people vulnerable, and each nation's response to this crime. This global picture of the problem is matched by clear steps to combat modern slavery and an urgent call to action for all governments. Importantly, this year, as well as examining where modern slavery is perpetrated, the 2018 edition exposes where the products of crime are sold and consumed. The headlines. The wealthy G20 countries are importing $354 billion worth of at-risk products each year. The US is responsible for $145 billion of these imports. Businesses and governments must examine supply chains to eliminate modern slavery. Those leading the way include China, Brazil, France, Germany, Italy, the UK and the United States. But more than half of the G20 countries are yet to act on this. Of the 40.3 million people in modern slavery, women and girls make up 71% of victims. The index also reports on prevalence of forced sexual exploitation and forced marriage. Unsurprisingly, the countries with the highest prevalence of modern slavery are those with state-imposed forced labour. In North Korea, 1 in 10 people is in modern slavery, forced to work by the state. But there is some encouraging news in the data. In 2018, 36 countries are taking steps to investigate forced labour in business or government supply chains, compared to only 4 in 2016. The governments taking the most action to respond to modern slavery are the Netherlands, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, North Korea, Libya, and Eritrea are taking the least. Countries with very poor responses to the problem, despite their wealth and resources, include Qatar, Singapore, Kuwait, Brunei, and Hong Kong. No country is immune to modern slavery. We must work together across borders to fight this transnational crime. By measuring and working with industry, governments, communities, and survivors, and reforming global supply chains, we can set millions free. Find out more at globalslaveryindex.org.
Jock Slade here, back with another unboxing.
Well, it's your homegirl, Shameless.
I was sent this box, and there is no markings on it that I can tell.
So it went from handmade to slave made.
This is very heavy.
So it looks like a custom sneaker.
It's a pair of headphones.
There's writing all over it.
They have all these little, facts.
1 in 4 victims of modern slavery worldwide is a child.
Children as young as 5 are forced to work in the mines. $90, the average cost of a slave today. Is that what it costs, to have a person?
That's so sad.
This is disturbing.
I guess the message here is that there is still slavery, which should make us all a little bit uncomfortable.
Suddenly, all the sand and mud collapsed on him.
I just can't even imagine what that would be like to witness, let alone live every day.
How many of you knew about this?
And so I'm interested to see what people think and start a conversation.
First thing that's going through my mind is, what am I going to do?
We have the power to change that.
We need to make sure they make this not happen.
I was 13. I was 13 when I met my boyfriend. He said I was beautiful, and I believed him. He said I could be a model, and I believed him. He made me feel so good about myself. He showered me with gifts, and I loved him for it. He said I was his Juliet, and I believed him. It was my real-life fairy tale, and I believed all of it. He told me he needed help paying bills, and made me go on dates. I was raped over and over again. When I had finally built up enough courage to refuse, my boyfriend beat me into submission. I could barely move. I only had one thought. Why? It was then that they brought in a group of men and gang raped me. I was broken. From then on, I was a different person. I was submitted to a public website where I could be purchased and used for a night. I was used over and over and over again. I found out that there were 9 others, all younger than me. Some of them were raped 10 times in a night by different men. I was in this life for 2 years. How did this happen to me? One night, there was a sting operation and I was arrested. I agreed to testify and found my way out. But my story isn't the only one. We just want you to know and remember.
Hello, I'm Dazza Greenwood, Executive Director of law.mit.edu. That is the MIT research unit that focuses on using computation as a form of expressing and applying legal rules and instruments and legal systems. We publish the MIT Computational Law report, and that report has convened a task force on using computational law and data as a method and mechanism for combating human trafficking and modern slavery. And I'm pleased to present an overview of that task force today before the UN World Data Forum. The Task Force on Computational Law for Combating Modern Slavery is an initiative of the Computational Law Report, as I mentioned, and it has the aim of convening leaders and doers that are dedicated to abolishing modern slavery and human trafficking. So that is the sort of moonshot big goal that we are focused upon. And you don't do that in one bite, of course, but this does partake somewhat of the abolitionist movement on slavery in the US tradition. And we are carrying that forward with a terrific set of partners in this domain of human trafficking and modern slavery. The task force aims to focus specifically on how data and computation can be effectively leveraged to combat these problems in the shorter term, to begin better identification and transparency and tracking and monitoring, and to enable better prevention and interdiction, and ultimately to, as I said, look at total eradication of this blight upon people. The task force is very fortunate to have a terrific membership and leadership from industry, the advocacy community, from the judiciary, from nonprofits, and the main full-time members of the task force, or the full members, I should say, include Shauna Hoffman of IBM, who is the task force chair, and Brian Ulisny, who is the co-chair, and he is from Thomson Reuters. We launched the task force at the MIT Media Lab in December 6th. In that event, we brought together a larger community of stakeholders that were focused on computational law. And for some of them, they hadn't considered yet getting involved in using their talents and skills and resources as a vector to push back on modern slavery and human trafficking, but they learned. And this is part of the community building mission of the task force, and the mission of popularizing more public information and awareness. And to that end, the task force has published its first report in the MIT Computational Law Report. It was published in May of this year, and it provided a introduction to and an overview of this modern slavery and human trafficking area, and it focused particularly on the impacts of COVID-19 and how that's affecting and changing modern slavery and human trafficking. It's accelerating it in some ways, and it may also be creating some new opportunities to fight back. we looked at some of the key dimensions of how we have observed COVID-19 and others have observed it impacting this area. And we did that in some particular segments, including the massage industry, labor exploitation, and the virtual sex work area, which has experienced a real spike. And that is, of course, all connected with child exploitation. And then we went into a fairly deep dive on computational law systems as a partial solution. Well, you know, most of this is a very human issue and a sort of practical issue. There are legal systems, obviously, very much involved. This is also a set of crimes and civil offenses. And there are many legal systems requiring reporting and monitoring and regulation that are not, you know, directly about modern slavery and human trafficking, but which can also be applied in concert and orchestrated to as part of the fight against it. So looking at that, we took a look at, again, at public awareness, the different levers we have for transparency and accountability, some more specific applications, and then, you know, perhaps and that was the meat of the article, of the report rather, but one of the most important features was the open questions. So in composing this report, it raised more questions than we were prepared to answer, and part of the delivery vehicle here was to articulate those open questions and to publish them at the bottom of the article. These questions in part will inform the future work of the task force, but we also feel that some of them at least may help catalyze and focus broader work to combat modern slavery and human trafficking. The article fundamentally was designed as a wake-up call for the communities that we touch in this field. We have on deck another report that is being drafted now that's focusing more on using data visualization to identify patterns. Partly that involves a collaboration with IBM's Traffic Analysis Hub, as well as with some other stakeholders. And we've had other collaborations as well, including the Data Jam Hackathon. You can learn more about this task force at law.mit.edu, where we have the task force page that is also linked from the slides. And notably, at the bottom of the task force page, there is a handy, simple, inviting, we hope, Google form where you can learn more. You can submit that form and learn more and get involved. And we genuinely hope that you will. So thank you very much for your time. We've got several members of in fact, all of the full members of the task force will be presenting as part of this UN panel. I hope that you'll pay careful attention to the work and the ideas that we're trying to bring forward. Thank you very much.
I'm Jacqueline Judo-Laughlin, and I lead research at Wolfrey, an international human rights organisation focused on ending all forms of modern slavery. A vital first step towards achieving this is to understand the scale of the problem. Only when we understand how many people this impacts and where can we design effective long-term solutions. Measuring modern slavery is difficult. It is a hidden and complex crime, and as a result, victims can be hard to identify. One of the challenges is that modern slavery often involves the use of deception or coercion, which are not obvious. Further, offenders often target vulnerable populations, many of whom have no incentive to come forward. Some victims remain hidden because they are afraid of coming forward and reporting their situation to authorities, which could result in arrest, deportation, harm to their family, feelings of shame, or reprisals from their communities. Others are far from sight. People forced to work in the commercial fishing sector, in logging and mining, and in agriculture tend to live and work in remote locations where oversight is extremely difficult, if not impossible. Others, such as victims of domestic servitude, live and work among us, but have limited contact with the outside world and as a result are often far from those who might help. Beyond this, there are forms of modern slavery such as organ trafficking, recruitment of children by armed forces or groups, and commercial sexual exploitation of children that we cannot yet adequately measure. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we needed to liberate 10,000 people living in modern slavery each day to achieve our goal of ending modern slavery by 2030. The current pandemic has exacerbated this situation. There are numerous reports of increases in child marriage and online commercial sexual exploitation of children, among other impacts during lockdown. Considering all these challenges, it isn't hard to see why cases of modern slavery reported to authorities significantly underrepresent the scale of the crime in the population. Fundamentally, we can't help people we can't find. In order to enhance the quality of anti-slavery efforts and to monitor our progress towards the SDGs, our understanding of the scale and nature of modern slavery must improve. The field requires renewed dedication to prevalence measurement in this evolving landscape.
I would like to start by saying thank you so much for having me today on this panel. My name is Adriana Bora and I'm an AI policy researcher at the Future Society. So we learned so far that data collection on modern slavery is very challenging in creating the evidence needed for appropriate intervention. However, unfortunately, the hurdles around working with data on modern slavery do not stop here. Once data is collected, it does not automatically become available and ready to be added to research or modern slavery projects. In fact, data-driven projects on modern slavery tend to have a set of common challenges around data accessibility, data quality, data structuring, data currency, or data interoperability. As we're going to find out later on in these sessions, at the Future Society, we work closely with Walk Free initiative from the Minduru Foundation on Project AIMS, which stands for AI Against Modern Slavery. In this project, we look at corporate reporting on modern slavery by analyzing their annual statements where they declare how they're ensuring that slavery doesn't happen in their supply chain. This project stands as a good example to illustrate the challenges that I mentioned above. So for a start, in this case, data currency is not a problem as the statements are available for free on companies' websites. However, collecting them is not very easy. This is due to an absence of centralized registry from the government. And we have already 70,000 documents and we expect a few more thousands each year to be published. And to collect all of those reports manually, it is very time consuming. Secondly, even when we have all those statements together, accessing and structuring the data from those statements is very difficult because data in this case is text and most of those reports are not being published in machine readable formats. Finally, data interoperability is key for this project as we would like to create the bigger picture on corporate reporting, on modern slavery, on non-financial reporting in general by merging this data set with other data sets. However, there is not a standardized way of collecting the metadata around the profile of the companies. To conclude, while technological solutions could be found for those challenges, what we encourage is the expansion of partnerships and coalition building between various sectors and stakeholders to ensure that work is not being duplicated and that we accelerate our work to meet the agenda on eradicating slavery. Finally, while unlocking data for the fight against modern slavery and human trafficking is very urgent and very important, it should only be done guided by ethical consideration and data protection principles, keeping in mind the safety of the victims who stand behind this data. Thank you.
Walk Free is an international human rights organization founded with a vision of ending modern slavery in our generation. The notion that you cannot effectively address an issue you do not understand drove our focus on research and measurement. From the very outset, measurement has underpinned our strategy, leading us to publish the Global Slavery Index, which, among other things, presents country-by-country estimates of the prevalence of modern slavery. Robust measurement of modern slavery is fundamental to identifying effective interventions, prioritizing finite resources, and tracking our collective progress towards Sustainable Development Goals 5.3, 8.7, and 16.2. Without measurement, it is incredibly difficult to know the level of resources to allocate to the problem and the areas of most need. It's also difficult to know whether we're making any progress and to identify what works to help inform interventions and relevant policy. So how do we go about measuring modern slavery? First and foremost, the task before us is enormous, and Walk3 recognises that collaboration enhances our measurement efforts. This work requires a team of methodologists, statisticians, social science researchers, funders, and frontline service providers to overcome the challenges inherent to the measurement of this crime. Many of our major measurement projects involve partnerships with international organisations, academic institutions, NGOs such as the Freedom Fund, companies such as Gallup, and individual experts, some of whom you will hear from shortly. Together with the International Labour Organization and the International Organization for Migration, we united the anti-slavery field around a single global estimate. We published the inaugural Global Estimates of Modern Slavery in 2017, and work is underway on the next edition. The joint estimate was a milestone for the anti-slavery movement and was intended to serve as a benchmark for policymakers and advocates. This work would not have been possible without collaboration. In terms of the methods themselves, our measurement efforts began with the need to produce comparable national level prevalence estimates for the Global Slavery Index. At the time, it was well accepted that recorded crime only captured a small proportion of the reality. There were few national level surveys to draw on, and fewer still that were comparable across countries. And yet, work to measure other crimes where official statistics were poor or non-existent pointed to the value of national surveys. In fact, random sample population surveys are now widely used to measure crimes that were previously unreported, such as sexual and domestic violence. When Walk3 first considered undertaking national surveys, our key considerations centred on the need for far more and more accurate data than was currently available, for harmonised tools to ensure cross-country comparability, and for methods that were cost-effective, given that the work needed to have scale. In 2014, Walk3 began using surveys as the core element of our methodology to estimate the prevalence of modern slavery. This began with a trial in a small number of countries and has since expanded to cover 54 countries and counting. These surveys form the basis for the global and regional estimates developed with the ILO and IOM, and the country-level estimates published in the Global Slavery Index. As it isn't possible to survey in every country, to do so is prohibitively expensive and logistically impractical, some form of extrapolation is necessary. Ahead of the 2018 GSI, the Walk3 Gallup team developed a methodology using hierarchical Bayes models, incorporating prior knowledge about the prevalence of modern slavery to inform estimates beyond the countries we had sampled. Surveys are not always the most suitable method. They aren't feasible in countries profoundly affected by conflict, where it is too dangerous for interviewers to operate, nor are they suitable for developed countries where there is a strong rule of law and as a result are likely to have relatively low rates of modern slavery. Since 2016, multiple systems estimation has been used to address the shortages in survey data from the latter group of countries, while also increasing data collection infrastructure and capacity with partner governments. Pablo, Sheldon, and Yuki, as members of the Global Slavery Index Expert Advisory Group, bring their expertise to guide the methodology of the GSI and will explore these methodologies in more detail. While significant advancements in the measurement of modern slavery have been made in a relatively short period, this is very much a field in the earliest stages of development. There is much more that we need to learn about the scale and nature of slavery, the risk factors, and what works. Investments in research will build the shared evidence base that will help end modern slavery. These are critical for supporting the work of frontline organisations and policymakers.
Hi, I'm Pablo Diego Rosell, and I'm a senior scientist working for the Gallup organization. Today, I want to tell you about our work measuring modern slavery through surveys and modeling. We work with the Walk3 Foundation and with the International Labour Organization in two major areas. First, we provide methodological and statistical support, and we also conduct global data collection through the Gallup World Poll. So let me tell you a bit about the Gallup World Poll. This is a global survey covering more than 150 countries in more than 140 languages every year. It currently represents over 95% of the world's population, and it's used by large international organizations like the World Bank, the OECD, the Food and Agriculture Organization, or the International Labour Organization. The World Poll is a general population survey, and as such is not necessarily well suited to target victims of modern slavery. So the number of victims is in the millions, but they may only represent a small fraction of a given country's population. So this may be hard to reach with a traditional random sample survey. Also, victims are usually living under fear or under coercion, and they may be really hard to reach with traditional face-to-face or telephone interviews. So we needed a dedicated survey methodology to reach them, including both a customized questionnaire and a customized sampling approach. So the Walk Free Foundation gathered a group of world-leading experts, and together we developed an initial questionnaire to capture the range of situations that could be classified as modern slavery. The questionnaire included a number of filter questions that would identify people at risk of modern slavery, and then a series of follow-up questions that would confirm the nature and the conditions of their exploitation. Now, in addition to the questionnaire, we also needed a sampling approach to actually reach those victims. So we developed a network sampling approach where respondents tell us about their own experiences, but also about the experiences of their family members. We're actually quite careful about defining the network as a precise set of family members rather than the more traditional household-based approach, so that they could provide information about people that they knew well and that they could communicate with. So now we had a questionnaire and a sample methodology to identify victims of modern slavery, and we tested this methodology through a series of in-depth interviews with victims and non-victims. We carried out cognitive interviews in Ethiopia, Nigeria, Indonesia, Nepal, Pakistan, and Russia. Now, cognitive interviewing is a technique that's used to check that respondents can actually understand and address the questions that you are putting to them. And the results of our cognitive interviews were quite positive, but they also helped us identify several important tweaks. For example, we initially had defined the family network broadly to maximize our chances of finding victims, but we soon found out that people don't usually have reliable information about more distant relatives like aunts, uncles, and cousins. So we narrowed it down to just parents, children, siblings, and spouses. So in spite of all of these methodological advances, measuring the full extent of modern slavery is still a challenge. So, for example, victims in low prevalence countries are hard to find. Victims in hard to reach situations, if the country is at war, etc., are hard to find. And some victims are also reluctant to disclose sensitive information. So this is particularly true in relation to activities that are illegal or that are taboo, such as commercial sexual exploitation. So in order to address some of these limitations, we developed a hierarchical-based modeling approach. This approach is useful because it can incorporate predictors at the individual level and the country level, that is the hierarchical part. And also it allows you to build on the strength of previous research so that you can incorporate prior information about a country's relative risk. In our analysis, we found that factors such as age, gender, employment status, well-being, or country governance would affect the risk of modern slavery. And we also found out that these risk models can be used to inform extrapolation methodologies wherever survey estimates are not viable in particular. So we launched the Modern Slavery Survey in 2014. Since then, we have collected representative interviews with victims of modern slavery in 54 countries, and we have an additional 26 countries coming in 2020. This survey methodology has been further refined since we started in partnership with the Walk Free Foundation and ILO. And the result is that our data currently informs key global statistics on modern slavery, including Walk Free's Global Slavery Index and also the ILO's global estimates of modern slavery. I hope that was useful. If you're interested in learning more, please feel free to email me at pablo_diego-rosell@gallup.com.
For much of the last 2 decades, the campaign against modern slavery has largely been powered by moral fumes, generated over anecdotal or media stories of atrocious human rights abuses. Exaggerated claims about the severity and the scope of the problem were frequently made in both government and non-government documents with little empirical support. Although the research community has been stepping up its effort in conducting empirical studies, we are still a long way to go in terms of the precision in our knowledge about this problem. There are two major obstacles that the researchers are struggling to overcome when it comes to measuring modern slavery. First, unlike many other social problems, such as unemployment, poverty, crime, or public health, modern slavery does not have nor fit into any existing data collection mechanisms to allow us to gauge its existence. Second, modern slavery is not an equal opportunity crime that afflicts the general population evenly. Instead, victims of modern slavery cluster in pockets of certain social demographic segments, which by nature defy most conventional research methods to study them. In other words, conventional probability-based sampling strategies will find few or no victims in the general population. Therefore, non-conventional methods need to be considered to improve our measurement. We know that people of similar socioeconomic backgrounds or vulnerability profiles tend to socialize with one another. If that's the case, then network-based sampling can be used to produce estimations about these pockets of the hidden population. Respondent-driven sampling, or RDS, is probably the best-known method to study hidden populations. The method is being widely applied by public health researchers to study hard-to-find populations, such as substance misusers, people of certain infectious disease, or by sociologists to reach small groups of networked individuals, such as jazz musicians or sex workers. Respondent-driven sampling has its origin in the traditional snowball sampling. RDS employs two main strategies to overcome the limitations of the traditional snowball sampling. One is incentivized recruitment. The other is structured recruitment procedures. A much longer discussion is required to get into the details on what these two strategies can do to improve the traditional snowball sampling. In theory, RDS can produce a robust network-based sample representative of its target population. As with all research methods, RDS has its inherent limitations. One major shortcoming is its difficulty in estimating the population size and characteristics. Another is the passive referral process, which can become rather time-consuming and also extend into unpredictable numbers of waves. In recent years, a Canadian statistician, Kyle Vincent, has developed procedures to improve the efficiency of the RDS recruitment process, as well as its ability to estimate population characteristics. This unique sampling strategy, which we call it the Vincent link tracing sampling, combines RDS with market recapture techniques. This strategy has two major features. One is to use official registries or other conventional sampling frames to generate a scattered list of initial entry points. And second is to apply an RDS type process to recruit only 2 to 3 waves of respondents. Special items are built into the survey instrument to establish overlaps between the social networks of these respondents. This procedure retains the attractive features of conventional sampling strategies while controlling for final sample sizes. The Vincent link tracing sampling has been successfully used in several large-scale field studies overseas, including India and Nepal. Currently, it's being used in Uganda and Belize. Now, another method that has received significant notice in the trafficking research community is the multi-system estimation, or MSE. The basic logic of MSE is fairly straightforward. It is essentially an extension of the classic mark and recapture sampling technique, which has been around for a long time and used extensively in wildlife research. This method makes use of agency-generated rosters to observe overlaps between the lists. When one human trafficking victim appears in one agency's list, it is considered marked. And if the same individual shows up in another list, it is considered a recapture. The number of individuals that are marked on one list or sample is used to estimate the population size, based on the principle that the proportion marked in the second sample approximately equals the proportion of marked individuals in the population as a whole. MSC has been used by academic researchers and large international organizations in a variety of contexts. In fact, the current global estimation of forced labor produced by the International Labour Organization is based on the MSC method. There are, of course, problems with this MSC method. For instance, agency rosters are often generated from diverse and inconsistent mechanisms, like police agencies, hospitals, community service providers, rescue operations, or shelters. Statisticians are developing techniques to deal with these many imperfections in the official records and also the statistical procedures. With the arrival of mark and recapture software, statisticians can now carry out sophisticated analysis with much ease. While imperfect in many ways, MSE can meet an urgent need for some ideas on the scale of the problem, since primary data collection is expensive and logistically challenging. There are clear advantages in the MSE method. It is probably the least expensive way to produce some prevalence estimation of the problem at hand. Using existing data sources, we can produce statistically sound figures by taking advantages of the overlaps among different data sources. The statistical principle behind the estimation technique is simple and robust. In the absence of other more rigorous methods, MSE is an efficient and cost-effective method to produce some indication on the scope of the problem. Suffice it to say, we still have a long way to go in the development of research tools to improve our understanding of the scale of modern slavery and to produce empirical evidence to guide policymaking and to plan and evaluate our interventions. Thank you.
A big thanks to Jackie and the team at Mindaru for organising this panel, and I'm very conscious that my fellow panelists are all pioneers in measuring modern slavery. So I hope to bring in a slightly different perspective by talking about the use of data by hidden and marginalised communities. And I'll do this by sharing the experience of the Freedom Fund. The Freedom Fund is a global organisation that identifies and invests in the most effective frontline efforts to tackle modern slavery. We currently support over 100 community organisations across 6 high prevalence countries to tackle different forms of slavery, ranging from forced labourers in Thai seafood factories, to bonded labourers in rural India, to child domestic workers in urban Ethiopia. Credible data on the scale and nature of slavery is crucial to our work. Firstly, it helps us assess whether the community interventions are reaching hidden populations and having a positive or negative effect. Secondly, data also provides us with evidence to help hold governments and businesses to account when they fail to protect their citizens and workers. And it's this second point that I'd like to focus on. How do we produce data that is useful and actually used to drive change on the ground? As my fellow panelists have highlighted, having a robust research methodology, including rigorous sampling strategies and data collection tools, are all crucial. But I think this is only part of the equation. In order for data to lead to effective actions and real change, it also needs to be understood and trusted by the people who are using it, including government officials, employers, local activists, and at-risk individuals. This means that people from hidden and marginalized populations should not only be seen as survey respondents or interviewees, but instead should be engaged from the beginning of the process to decide what data is needed, how it should be collected, and when it's needed by. Local knowledge really helps to make sure that we're gathering the right data. Across the places where the Freedom Fund works, we've seen this approach really pay off in terms of producing data that leads to concrete actions. In the Thai seafood sector, where the International Labour Organization estimates that 1 in 10 workers have been victims of forced labour, NGOs were able to draw on their case data to highlight the inadequacy of government data protection mechanisms. By comparing the NGO records with government data, they were able to show that the number of workers from fishing vessels who have lodged complaints for serious labour violations were more than 5 times higher than what's shown in the government data. This led to international press coverage, and eventually the Thai Labour Ministry admitted that complaints have wrongly gone unrecorded. In Rajasthan state in India, NGOs were able to help improve the accountability of government schools by gathering data from the community. They found that most parents did not know who was on the school management committee of their children's school. More worryingly, even members of the committee were unaware that they were members. These findings were presented to the Department of Education, and it led to a statewide order requiring that the names of all school management committee members be publicly displayed at over 37,000 schools across the state, a step towards greater transparency and inclusion in government schools. These are just some examples, but I hope that it demonstrates the importance of working with local communities to turn data into concrete actions. Of course, there is much value in large-scale data efforts, such as the global estimates of modern slavery, which the Freedom Fund is a fan and a frequent user of. At the same time, I hope that more time, effort, and resources can go towards working with communities affected by slavery to support them in designing, collecting, and using data. From what we've seen at the Freedom Fund, data in the hands of marginalized communities can be tremendously empowering and a potent catalyst for change. Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Brian Wilson, Brian Ulisny, and Adriana Bora in regard to turning data into actionable insights, including technology-driven computational law, AI, and big data methods that can be developed and deployed to help governments, businesses, and civil society combat human trafficking and modern slavery.
Hi, my name is Brian Wilson, and I'm a fellow in the MIT Connection Science Research Group under the direction of Professor Alex Pentland. There, I serve as the editor-in-chief of the MIT Computational Law report, which is available at law.mit.edu. Today, I'm going to provide a brief overview of what computational law is, and then I'll walk through some examples that concretely demonstrate how this emerging discipline of computational law can be used to address some of the biggest challenges that exist at the intersections of modern slavery and human trafficking. So computational law is an interdisciplinary field that combines computer science, design, and a number of other disciplines in order to address some of the biggest challenges facing the world today. Indeed, with modern slavery and human trafficking, traditional disciplines on their own have really proven inadequate for the complex and continually evolving nature of these problems. However, by leveraging the strengths of each discipline in a more inclusive and better integrated way, not only is it possible to mitigate some of the weaknesses of each individual approach, but there's also new opportunities for fighting modern slavery and human trafficking with a more holistic approach and a more modern toolkit. The actual variety of tools used to accomplish these goals are varied, but they are not exactly so different from many of the innovations that have become popular since the rise of the internet. At the simplest level, a computational law tool could be developed to inform people about the appropriate parties to reach out to if they notice some suspicious behavior. There are many examples of this already in airports with signs about who to contact and what actions to take if you suspect somebody might be human trafficked. Other solutions could likewise provide the same sort of insight and knowledge about what to do if you see something suspicious somewhere else. for example, at a sporting event or in a public space. It could even be used to help train workers in the hospitality industry to identify problems before they're beginning to occur, and also to collect information about which problems have occurred the most often. This leads us to the first key insight about computational law. A computational law tool can be used to provide guidance to people about what actions to take, and also can be used to collect information that will be useful to better understand the problems as they're playing out over time. Another example has a little bit more complexity to it, is from a group called Trafficking. Trafficking enables people to upload photos from the inside of hotel rooms they're staying in as a resource to determine where perpetrators of sex trafficking are committing these crimes. Then, this database of different hotel rooms can be used by investigators to identify where crimes are taking place, and later used in court as evidence to prosecute these crimes. As a result, the process for uploading photos of the hotel rooms has been designed specifically in order to meet the legal standards for admissibility of evidence. This gets to a second key insight. Computational law can leverage clever design patterns in order to find new ways to improve fairness and trust in our existing judicial systems. Finally, the most complex example of computational law that I'm sharing with you today comes from IBM's Traffic Analysis Hub. Traffic Analysis Hub aggregates and indexes information from all over the world in a number of different formats in order to visualize large-scale trends in modern slavery and human trafficking. The data that is collected here includes arrest reports, news stories, and statistics that are being continually updated by a huge network of collaborators. Together, using a tool like this, it is actually possible to measure the efficacy of different programs and regulations designed to combat modern slavery and human trafficking. This platform also serves as a way to improve collaboration between people working in the space. This gets to a final insight. When built correctly, computational law systems can leverage the tools that are out there in order to reduce complexity and friction for everybody doing work in the space, and really begin to multiply the positive impact that we can all make together by sharing insights and sharing best practices. Throughout much of the last year, our task force on computational law for combating modern slavery and human trafficking has been putting together a series of articles that discuss these subjects in greater detail. If you would like to check these out, please head over to law.mit.edu for more information.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Workman and I'm an analyst at Thomson Reuters Special Services. And one of the things that we're really proud of doing at TRSS is support the US government in its fight against forced labor and human trafficking. So as many of you know, in order to prove human trafficking, we have to prove the existence of force, fraud, or coercion. This is certainly difficult to do in many cases, as traffickers intentionally obscure their activity and their involvement, but we found that it's not impossible and that it can be done to a significant degree of success, actually, by taking advantage of commercially and publicly available data. So I'll go through a couple of examples of how we do that. So first, I will outline our method for identifying trafficking networks among illicit massage businesses, or IMBs. Here in the United States, that not only give the legitimate massage industry a bad name by tainting it with commercial sex, but also do a serious harm by systematically exploiting women as sex trafficking victims. So the workers in IMBs are usually from somewhere in Asia, and we've assisted with several very successful investigations into massage-based sex trafficking networks using our network-based approach. So to summarize, we can start with a list of potential victims from either sex ads or arrest records, or we can start with a list of potential IMBs that we get from sex ads or sex review websites. We combine that with our Thomson Reuters public records data, and to see relationships that look like the graphic on the left of your screen. We found that victims often have address records connecting them to known IMBs, and also find residential addresses that occur in these networks more frequently than we should expect. And by evaluating certain risk indicators that are available in public records, we can assess the likelihood of a person that shows up in this network that they are either potentially a victim or a potential trafficker, and kind of blow out that network and build a picture of what it looks like based off our data. So the example that you now see on the right is a view of the IMBs in a major American city and their relationships between one another using our networks. It's very useful on our end, but images like this are not easily digested by law enforcement. But by applying our data science techniques, such as discrete community detection, we can take that same graph that you see and turn it into something like this. At the end of the day, what we're doing is providing easier to understand visualizations to our customers to help them with resource prioritization, right? As they often have limited resources, but unlimited targets. It's very effective, and with that and developing relationships with NGOs and industry representatives, we help our customers by taking a more holistic and effective approach by removing sex trafficking from the massage industry versus a whack-a-mole approach. We found that the same methods are useful for identifying other types of domestic labor trafficking here in the United States, specifically the exploitation of agricultural and seasonal workers on U.S. farms. So we have a seasonal worker who is sponsored to work via a temporary H-2A visa at a U.S. farm. Unfortunately, when they arrive, they do not receive what they were promised in their recruitment process, thus the fraud. We observed credible reports of unsafe work conditions, forced living conditions, of wage theft that can quickly lead into debt bondage. And so as you can see, a lot of the relationships between the trafficking victims and the traffickers in the agricultural setting looked pretty similar to those in the massage parlor example. So we wanted to see if we could apply the same methodology, our network-based approach, to a different typology of trafficking. We found that we could build similar networks in this example, and that we could assess the likelihood of a person being a labor trafficking victim by several different indicators. So first, by comparing the thinness or size of their public records profile to others in the network, one of the common patterns we saw are that trafficking victims whose names are used on certain utility records related to the farm, but which don't appear on any other public record, as you would expect a person with agency or free will to do. Many of these profiles we find congregate at these farms, which are our potential victims. But then we see a much smaller group of people with more robust public profiles, which, based on other analysis and other indicators, appear to play an active role in the trafficking process, most likely as recruiters or facilitators. The Thomson Reuters Special Services mission is to bring together the world's most creative minds to support our clients' critical missions and empower data for good.
We've learned so far from my fellow panelists that modern slavery is a multi-billion-dollar transactional crime that touches all of us, trade and consumer choices. We have an estimate of over 25 million people being in forced labor, out of which 60 million are forced to work in the private sector. Given the widespread nature of the problem, governments, corporations, and the general public are increasingly expecting companies to accurately disclose the action they are taking to tackle modern slavery in their supply chain and operations. A valuable source of information in this regard is corporate reporting resulting from supply chain transparency requirements in domestic legislation. Firstly, we had the California 2010 Transparency in Supply Chain Act, followed by the UK Modern Slavery Act of 2015 and Australia Modern Slavery Act of 2018. All of those legislation requiring companies to illustrate the steps they are taking to eradicate modern slavery from their direct operation and supply chain. Over the last 3 years, we have over 17,000 statements published, with an estimate of 12,000 to 17,000 statements expected to be published per annum. Yet few studies have attempted to assess those statements due to the laborious nature of manually analyzing each of them. As companies continue to report under those legislations, failure to address those obstacles to efficiently and consistently assess modern slavery statements will undermine the ultimate potential of those legislations to improve transparency and accountability in business operation and supply chain and eradicate modern slavery. To date, access to modern slavery statements has been done to companies' website or to the compilation efforts done by the Business and Human Rights Research Center, Modern Slavery Registry, TISC, and Wikiread, who have collected, collated, and analyzed some of this data. Much of this information has been collected manually, with teams of researchers searching for and systematically reviewing available statements. For example, the most comprehensive study to date, concluded by WalkFree and Wikiread, sampled no more than 1,300 reports, and this process took over 2 years to complete. Volunteers from prestigious universities read and benchmark each of the reports manually, taking up to 1 hour per volunteer per report. So given this is a very costly exercise that requires a lot of man-hours, a more centralized and automatized approach is desirable. Promising steps in this part of at least collecting the statements is the development of the UK Modern Slavery Registry and the recent launch of Australian Registry, which will centralize the hosting of these statements. However, this does not solve the issue around analyzing the content of those statements, and thus technological innovation needs to also reduce the time taken to extract the relevant information from the statements. In May this year, the Future Society, in partnership with WalkFree, took on this challenge and launched Project AIMS, which stands for Artificial Intelligence Against Modern Slavery. Project AIMS builds upon the work done so far by WalkFree, Wikiread, and Business and Human Rights Research Center, and uses the latest data science and machine learning techniques with a particular focus on natural language processing and computational linguistics to allow us to dive deep into each report, assess it, and improve the overall understanding of the quality of reports produced under those legislation. This algorithm uses 18 metrics designed following the UK Home Office guidance. Those metrics are qualities that we believe are very important to be found in each of a good report. And they are assessing if, for instance, the statement is signed, if it's approved by the board, if the company has disclosed their supply chain or they describe their modern slavery policy, if they've done the risk assessment, training to the employees, etc. So once developed, this tool will help us increase efficiency and transparency for consumers and businesses while being aligned with the best practices in terms of ethics by design. The overarching project will attempt to identify and share best practices in modern slavery reporting, identify sector-specific risks where reporting is falling short to address modern slavery, and make recommendations for improving businesses' compliance with the UK and Australian Modern Slavery Act. Hopefully, in the future, the governments who are currently developing similar legislation could follow those recommendations as well. Project AIMS seeks to capture the potential of artificial intelligence to help solve pressing social issues in new ways and to ultimately uphold human dignity. With this innovative machine learning tool, our goal is twofold: empower civil society and legislation to hold businesses and governments to account, and pave the way for a new type of public policy and legislation which embraces the full power of data mining and processing. Thank you very much.
One of the most beautiful things about the internet is that it can unlock our best potential. The ability to share, access, and make use of information is greater now than it has ever been. By working together and taking a collaborative approach from stakeholders in numerous disciplines, we can all develop tools and methods that reduce the space where bad actors are operating. And while it would be hubris to suggest that these tools, approaches, and systems on their own can eliminate outright human trafficking and modern slavery, we know that we can certainly develop better systems that bridge the gap between where we are and where we want to be. As we have demonstrated through the work chronicled and published in the MIT Computational Law report by this task force, there are a number of basic things that groups and individuals can do in order to make a positive impact. For example, this can be done through the creation of educational tools and collection of data by the people most likely to witness modern slavery and human trafficking. This can be done through the creation of tools to aid in the process of investigating modern slavery and human trafficking, and also streamlining those legal processes that are associated with this. And this can also be done through the creation of tools that aggregate a bunch of information from collaborators all around the world and put us in a much better position to understand and respond to the challenges that we face. Whether it is developing an app, participating in a hackathon, or even just spreading awareness of the problem, there's something out there for everyone. If you would like to learn more about how to get involved with groups who are doing this sort of work, we publish content in the MIT Computational Law report that explores how to reimagine law as something dynamic, interoperable, and adaptive, to cultivate an open discussion at the intersection of law and computation, and to create space for experimenting with new technologies. Many of the same things that we've been talking about here today. In closing, I hope you join us in continuing to explore the ways that law, design, and most importantly, data can shine a light on the issues facing us and help show us a better path forward. Thank you.
Hi, my name is David Crowley with TRUPR LLC. Over the past quarter century, trends in consumer demands have significantly shifted from ownership of property to a focus on subscription services and leasing. The millennial consumer tends to focus on subscription services, while the baby boomer generation notably emphasized the ownership of goods, such as housing, cars, rental homes, timeshares, and clothing. Digital platform services with a focus on short-term contract work and client anonymity lend themselves to criminal behavior. Laws never keep up and are often slow to adapt to variations and newly developed uses of technology. Platform workers, such as those operating in rideshare and task-based apps, are often subject and complicit in illegal activity without their consent or knowledge. Major money transfer sites and fintech apps report high levels of money laundering and fraudulent activity. Platforms in digital marketplaces employ workers on a freelance subcontractor basis, meaning that individuals incur the burden of legal responsibility instead of the platform company itself. Currently, the working condition of over 50% of the United States population operate in a gig economy platform infrastructure. Companies have begun to outsource employees on a freelance basis as well as outsource their own responsibility. Most platforms have an easy registration process for clients. This design makes it easy to fake identities and hide IP addresses and the likes, allowing criminals to utilize services with maximum level of privacy. Digital platform companies secure and protect their data in walled gardens of information and do not often share data with other platforms or law agencies, making crime easy to transact and hide. Many platform companies focus on temporary accommodation and transportation without the use of physical IDs or high levels of security infrastructure. Scenarios such as this make it ideal for human trafficking and transportation. Protection for both employees and clients is a top concern for all companies. As digital services become more prevalent in the global sharing economy, both consumers and businesses capitalizing on such services must begin to design products with safety in mind. Social network apps should incorporate more features that allow community users to report suspicious activities, as well as apps that focus on service industries. Additionally, companies should incorporate features that allow users to alert or contact local law enforcement and aid in the protection of their fellow man. Furthermore, the vast amount of data collected by these major platform institutions can and should be leveraged in the future to both track and prevent major crimes. The modern consumer needs both access to instant service as well as access to instant safety. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tomas Lars. I'm the founder and president of United Abolitionists, headquartered here in Orlando, Florida. Thank you for being a part of our session today. I hope what you've learned has moved you to action. We've all heard the proverb, it takes a village, and it takes each and every one of us to get involved in our local communities and our state or nation. Together we can make global impact in the fight against modern-day slavery. Please contact your local governmental or non-governmental organization in the fight against modern-day slavery, human trafficking. Thank you.